Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology. Hello, listeners. In this episode, we talk to David Teitelman about body image, coping with chronic health issues, and healing old wounds using skills of mindfulness and compassion. David is an authorized teacher of mindful self-compassion through the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. He's one of the authorized facilitators for the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion's Circles of Practice. David is also the resident mindfulness teacher at Temple Micah in Denver, Colorado. In a former life, he was a ballet dancer, singer, and healthcare administrator.
If you love Noble Mind, we'd love for you to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter, and come join our free Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/NobleMind. And as always, you can learn about upcoming events, get show notes, and join our email list at noblemindpodcast.com. Enjoy the show. We are here with David Teitelman. Welcome to Noble Mind. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps we could just get started by having you say hello to our listeners and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. David Teitelman. I am a trained mindful self-compassion teacher, authorized by the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And I'm probably a bit of an unusual guest for this podcast. I'm not a professional mindfulness teacher or mindful self-compassion teacher. I have developed such a passion for this that this is something that I feel strongly that I want to share and expand out to the world. But due to a variety of circumstances, this is not something that I do on a full-time basis, but it's something that with as much energy and time that I do have, it's something that's extremely important to me. I came to mindfulness starting about, 6-7 years ago, purely from a personal perspective to try to get better at stress management and dealing with my anxiety. And then I was gently introduced to self-compassion and mindful self-compassion. And after a little resistance, I took a course and found, surprisingly to me, and we can talk more about that, that was something that resonated. And I continued to practice and then ultimately, a couple of years later, decided that I wanted to become a teacher so that I could help spread this to more and more people.
Wonderful.
As someone who has taken the 8-week Mindful Self-Compassion course with David and attended many circles of practice sessions led by him, I can attest that you're an excellent teacher.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Would you tell us a bit about your personal journey? What got you into self-compassion, mindfulness?
When I started really pursuing mindfulness, like I said, it was in response to kind of increased stress and anxiety. And I had, I guess going back, even as a young adult or even as a teenager, I had predilections towards contemplative practice, but I didn't know what that was. I was fascinated with Tai Chi at the time, and I did study Tai Chi a little bit in my late teens and early 20s, although that dropped away after I kind of got busy with life. But I did pick up martial arts again later in life, and Tai Chi specifically, and that has very much a contemplative, meditative component to it. And so the journey from kind of, quote unquote, moving meditation, if you want to consider Tai Chi that, some people do, to mindfulness meditation was pretty easy for me. But what I brought with me was a whole lifetime of unresolved, unreflected trauma and and just the vicissitudes of life, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was 40 something, late 40s when I actually started all of this. I'm mid 50s now. So for somebody who I thought was a pretty self-aware person, I wasn't as self-aware as I
Mhm.
really thought I was. So
Mm-hmm.
I brought with me a lot of emotions bottled up and, quite honestly, a self-image that was extremely poor.
Mm-hmm.
And the main part or reason for that was I had a very negative association with my body. And that was really something, as I started to peel apart the layers. And this wasn't just through mindful self-compassion, this was through a lot of therapy and other things. But as I pulled apart the layers and kind of dissected what kind of transpired in my life, I had some early childhood experiences that were very, I mean, they were traumatic to me, in terms of how my family and my parents in particular related to my body. And the basic issue was the fact that I was kind of a chubby, fat kid
Mhm.
back in the early 70s, mid 70s, when chubby people, fat people were not as accepted.
Yeah.
Not that they're necessarily accepted today, but
Mm-hmm.
and my parents were former fat
Mhm.
kids growing up. So
Mm-hmm.
they were in a way, were trying to spare me what they went through. But in doing that, they did it in a very negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a very sensitive child. That's the other thing is that I wasn't
Yeah.
just a child who could just take it and just roll with the punches. I was an extraordinarily sensitive child, and I took it very personally, and it became part of who I was. And because I have a body type that is predisposed to holding on to weight, it's been something that I have fought for my entire life. And that's
Mm-hmm.
literally what it was. It was a fight
Fight.
to
Yeah.
constantly try to change my body because the thought was, I have to change my body to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
I have to change my body to be loved. That's what was
Yeah.
instilled within me, or at least that's how I took it. And so what that led to was, 40 plus years of resenting, trying to change, trying to, do whatever I could to modify the size of my body so that I could quote unquote fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And it went from just like
Yeah.
parental approval or love, but then it just expands when you have an image, when you have an eating disorder, it expands to everything. You generalize
Mm-hmm.
everybody, that everything is contingent on what your size is.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's almost like anything that's wrong becomes like the solution becomes changing your body somehow. Anything you
Exactly.
don't like in life or yeah. Yeah, thank you so
Right.
much. Yeah, I appreciate your sharing and I know, culture being what it is, that a lot of our listeners and even Alex and I to our own extents can relate to the body
Yeah.
struggle,
Totally.
and the way that
Yeah.
we're taught to kind of objectify ourselves from such a young age and like you're
Right.
saying, makes so much contingent on the body.
And it's insidious because, what you're being, because you have doctors telling you, oh, you need to lose weight. And then, throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000s,
The authorities.
there's so much emphasis on, oh, here's the latest thing that's going to help solve the problem. Oh, and you weren't doing it right. It wasn't low carb, it was low fat, or if it was
Mm,
whatever. And so I was always thinking, oh, I just wasn't doing it right, or I'm just not
right,
working hard enough.
right.
And as I got older and older, my ability to change my body got less and less.
Yeah.
And part of that too is because at the same time, I had a medical condition brewing that
Mm,
started in my late 20s that
mm,
was a very slow condition, but over the next 20 plus years was manifesting itself. And it also was probably affecting my ability to lose weight. Or to control anything related to my body.
Yeah.
So what kind of happened in my late 40s that kind of led me to mindfulness and all this is that my health condition had progressed to the point where it was becoming very impactful in my life. My ability to modify my body and I went from conventional means to try to change my body to very extreme means that were not helpful, and certainly not respectful and supportive of my body. So I kind of had a confluence of my health declining, my coming to the realization that it's hopeless. I can't do anything about the shape of my body. And, that's a very depressing / kind of hopeless place to be. And that's kind of where I ended up when I started, with a new therapist and got involved in mindfulness. And she was a wise therapist, and she was, the reason why I worked with her is she was somebody who had a practice in mindfulness and included that in her therapy. And at some point, she gently introduced the concept of maybe you ought to try this mindful self-compassion thing.
You also have a history of doing ballet.
Yes.
Maybe there's a book in there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, again, I was this very sensitive child. Those sensitivities led me to be very interested in the performing arts. So versus, I was not like a sports person. I was the musician. I was the theater kid. And then I got exposed to dance, and I for whatever reason, dance really became a very significant thing to me as a young teen. And classical ballet was actually the most interesting thing to me. And for whatever reason, there was a brief period of time from about 15 to 19 where my body slimmed down. Probably it's called puberty and adolescence. And I was able to, kind of take the shape to a certain extent of a classical ballet dancer. And I was invited to practice and study at the school of the Florida Ballet, which was the one professional ballet company in Florida at the time.
Goodness.
And it was a fascinating experience. And I got to, it was very intense. When I wasn't in school, I was at the ballet school, and I got to perform with the professional company a number of times. And yet, on the other hand, it was very fulfilling. And I almost pursued a career in dance, but on the other hand, it was also very damaging because back then, so this was the mid 80s, the dance world was tough. And the people who ran this were trained by, former, Russian, dance professionals. And they didn't hold any punches when they were giving critique and feedback. And, you were constantly criticized about your body.
Wow.
And think about it. You're standing in front of a mirror in a leotard and tights for 5 to 6 hours a day. Wow. So here I come in already being self-conscious, and then I have to stare at myself in the mirror and then be told that I need to lose weight and other people. It wasn't just me. And, it wasn't surprising that a couple of the company members developed eating disorders. And we watched people become skeletons in front of us. And it was very disturbing. Yeah. And it did not help my ability to become comfortable with myself because you're never good enough. And
Right.
part of it is you're honing a craft, right? So you always can improve.
Yeah.
But the way that I looked at it was, it just wasn't good enough. So I got to be better. I can get the approval of the teacher, so it was it was tough. It was tough. So I ended up not pursuing dance, and I don't know, maybe that was part of it, but movement's very important to me. I ended up taking, like I said, I picked up martial arts later in life, and I got a lot out of that while I was able to do it before my health deteriorated. So, yeah.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's something, like there's some part of, maybe you at 15, right? That something feels really good about being in your body and moving and dancing. And there's something really healing, like there's a wellspring there that maybe would be healing, especially from what you described from when you were younger. But then in that culture of the way that ballet was taught, is taught, I don't know, it just, ended up being, not so helpful and sort of underlining the worst body messages, because
totally.
But such a authentic, as you're saying, like movement's really important, and there's so much healing that can come out of that embodiment.
Oh, very much so. I really think that's true. Yeah.
I can imagine the self-critic going into overdrive in both of those situations. You got it particularly harsh, I think, but at the same time, it's such a global problem, right? With increasing mental health among the youth. There's always someone who's better looking, younger, richer.
Right.
So you're never good enough if you go by that. Yeah.
It's very true, and I developed a fairly significant problem with comparing myself to other people, because I was like, I had to compare myself to other people in a way, because like I'm trying to be better than I am and look like, do more like what other people are. But even when I was out of the dance world, it was like it continued to be, then I entered kind of the corporate world after I got out of school, and corporate world back in the early 90s was, and probably it still is, but was dog eat dog type of thing, and who's smarter, better, faster, and it was constant comparison and constant criticism, and that just became a way of life for me.
Yeah. And then, as so often happens, whenever we talk to people on the show and they share their personal journeys, it's like there's a crisis point or like a nexus or something where it just won't hold anymore, and it sounds like with your health and all that stuff coming together was just like something's got to change or this isn't working. And then the therapist introduces mindfulness or self-compassion and the whole map changes.
Yeah, I never thought, I honestly probably didn't think I'd ever, I don't know, I didn't know that there could be a different way.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I just thought I was going to be miserable forever. And then, just when you think you're miserable enough, then life throws another blow at you. This progressive disease, or condition, which manifested in very subtle, nuanced ways initially. And I was misdiagnosed over the course of 20 years, many times. I actually had 2 different surgeries that were unnecessary, turns out. And it wasn't until 2019 that when I continued to have symptoms, and the symptoms were getting worse, and they were different. And I had given up several times, saying I'm tired of going to doctors. They keep telling me it's something else. It's not something else. And something, I don't know what propelled me to try one more time to go through this approach. And I finally got on a diagnostic path, which was a very long process, but it turns out I have a progressive neuromuscular condition that's genetically, it's a genetic genetically driven disease. It's something that is, I guess, a defect in one of the genes that controls how your metabolism is done and how you take energy and use energy.
Wow.
And the net result of that is that it results in muscle damage, muscle death, and then a cascade of other symptoms like extreme fatigue, and then kind of the muscle damage then leads to other issues like not being able to breathe properly, not being able to swallow properly, not being able to walk properly, and so ultimately it can lead to, complete incapacitation, and it is progressive. So it if I live long enough, it likely will do that, and from 2019 moving forward, I had kind of a rapid decline. I went from being, walking 2 hours a day outside, hiking, all those other things you do in Colorado, to not even being able to walk around the block, and then working. I was still working. I worked my way up in the corporate world and had a very good job with an excellent company, leading a team of 100 people, large budget, big responsibility, to the point where I couldn't work a full day. I couldn't work a half a day. I couldn't maintain the stamina to be able to do the work, and ultimately had to stop working and became disabled. So I don't work anymore because I can't. I just don't have the energy. The pain related to this condition is significant, and there's a lot of other things that go along with that. So yeah, it's like, okay, it's bad enough that I was already torturing myself around self-image, and I had a relationship, a long marriage that dissolved. I have a special needs kid, and then life throws another thing at me. And that's when mindfulness and self-compassion really, I was introduced to it. And maybe it's just like, when you're at what you think to be your lowest, you finally are open to looking at the world a different way.
It reminds me of John Kabat-Zinn's Full Catastrophe Living. But then you discovered mindfulness and compassion, and how have they helped you cope?
Yeah, Full Catastrophe. That's exactly right. And that was actually his book was one. Yeah, well, his book was very influential to me. I did. That was one of the first books I probably read in around mindfulness, and what happened, and I have to say that it wasn't like a light bulb just turning on, because I had a lifetime of the opposite of self-compassion, right? I had developed an excellent, like you said earlier, an excellent inner critic. My inner critics were and are very, they've been honed, and well practiced. So to be able to recognize that I actually have the capacity to be kind to myself has been, was a slow process. But what happened was, in the very first 8-week class that I did, I was skeptical. I wasn't, I've always kind of like poo-pooed the touchy-feely stuff, and making fun of it, just like I am right now. And the way that the program was presented to me was a little touchy-feely, the way the instructors talked, and it was a little hard to relate, but by doing the practices, I realized that, wait a minute, this actually does kind of work. you know? If you kind of suspend disbelief, if you have disbelief, and you just kind of do it, you know, it's because a lot of how self-compassion works and mindfulness works, of course, as you guys know, it taps into the biochemistry of the body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Buddha was very
Mm-hmm.
smart. You know, these people that that really kind of honed this contemplative practice, they maybe didn't realize that it was tapping into biochemistry, but it does tap into
Yeah.
it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, if you suspend disbelief and if you practice, it's almost like you can't help not feeling better.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're building those
So
tissues in the mind and the body.
yeah, I mean, you're creating new neural pathways. You're tapping into the parasympathetic nervous system. You're learning to calm your body. You're learning to be open to a different voice inside of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And so that 8-week course was very powerful to me, and I realized, boy, I really want to keep practicing this.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I needed to. It wasn't just, I couldn't do this on my own. So luckily, the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion has what's called the Circles of Practice, which is for graduates. Well, now it's open. We actually have a version of it, the Circles of Practice, that's open to the public. That was started when
Mm-hmm.
COVID started. But it was an opportunity to practice a couple of times a week with other people that had gone through the course, and it was facilitated by a teacher who helped. It's kind of like it's kind of like a little sangha, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of helped
Yes.
us as we kind of move forward in the journey, because the journey starts at the end of the 8-week course. That's not when it ends.
Mm-hmm.
It's when it starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. Well, I also really appreciate you sharing about your struggles, because I think, I don't know, sometimes mindfulness and maybe self-compassion, I don't know, but self-care type activities can feel a little bit like a luxury or good if you have time or like whatever. But so when you hear about people who've, really endured hard times and have found the practice to be really helpful in getting through, major crises in life, it also sort of helps, I would hope, for folks listening who are like, I don't know about this. Like, it's sort of like the proof is in the pudding. And when you see people who've, endured great suffering and found some benefit from it, it sort of there's more of a power to that testimonial, I guess, of its benefit. And I'm wondering, as I'm saying that, if whether there's any particular practices, from, any kind of mindfulness or self-compassion that have really stood out to you, or, if our listeners are, struggling with their own difficulties, their own health, body image issues, self-criticism, whatever, are there certain practices that you have found most helpful in addressing those difficulties?
Yes, it's interesting. To your previous point, I noticed that Sharon Salzberg on her
Mm.
Facebook page just recently posted something like, um, "If I had meditated in the last year, then blank," and asked people to respond.
Ah, uh-huh.
And it was really interesting to see the responses. And my response to
Mm.
that is, if I hadn't meditated in the last year, I think I would be dead.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
That's how strongly I feel about it.
Yeah.
So it's not a luxury. It's not a luxury to me.
Yeah.
Um, this is critical for me to be able to maintain some kind um, of balance in the midst of a challenging life.
Yeah.
And everybody has challenging lives. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't need to be, a big. Sometimes it's not a big set of things. Sometimes it may be what you might consider a small set of things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a calm period. But inevitably, the point is that everybody's gonna go through hard times. It's
Yeah.
just the way it is. That's what life is.
Totally.
And so if we don't have the resilience, we don't have the skills to deal with it, like I didn't for 40, whatever, 6 years,
Mm-hmm.
then at the whim of whatever you're enduring, and that can be terrible, obviously. So practices that I have found helpful. I mean, one of the things that I personally have felt is so powerful are practices that bring me back to my ground, bring me back to my body, and bring me back to the ground. Because so often we can feel groundless. We can feel like the carpet is pulled out from under us. And then it's like there's nothing to hold on to. And that's what it feels like to me oftentimes when, you get presented with another thing that you didn't expect to have happen. And COVID, pull the carpet out,
Right. Kind of stuck in that waiting for the other shoe to drop experience. And it seems like there's always another shoe, endless shoes.
Where are all these shoes coming from? Yeah. So
how many feet are there?
So I really, and I was exposed to a practice by one of my very wonderful teachers, Tina Gibson, that was a grounding practice. And what it really entails is, and then I adapted it a little bit for my own sake. When I realized one day, I was like, I feel completely, like the wind has taken me, and I'm getting out of control. And I just noticed the cycling of just feeling completely out of control, because everything was out of control. But the reality is that it may seem out of control, and it may be out of control, but at the end of the day, I can put my feet on the ground. So literally putting your feet on the ground and just feeling the solidity of the earth, and just being able to breathe and feeling yourself breathe, and just feeling yourself in the chair, and knowing in this moment, maybe not the next moment, maybe not before, but in this moment, I'm still, I'm grounded. And then tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system, because that cycling up is the stress reaction, and it's like that, all of that cycling up and getting lost in all of the craziness cycles up that sympathetic nervous system. And so by tapping into the parasympathetic, breathing slowly while feeling yourself on the ground, realizing that I'm okay, and then kind of tapping into the Rick Hansen kind of concept of I'm okay right now, and realizing I'm okay right now. So I have a little practice, and it kind of incorporates both kind of mindful self-compassion, a little bit of Rick Hansen, a little bit of Tai Chi, because Tai Chi, the key element of Tai Chi is connecting to the earth. And rooting, we call it rooting in Tai Chi. So you're rooted like a tree. And so a tree that's rooted can bend back and forth in the storm, but doesn't snap. Right? So that's really important. So kind of this practice of taking, Tina calls it taking, your compassionate seat, or kind of the little practice that I talked about. So that's become very important to me. But there are a bunch of of other practices for mindful self-compassion that are so powerful, and they don't have to be big things.
Right.
The kind of the seminal practice that I think is one of the best informal practices we have is the self-compassion break, where it really kind of ties together the three elements of mindful self-compassion. So mindfulness is being aware that you're suffering, because when you're in the midst of the getting out of control, we don't realize we're out of control until, we're already way out of
You're
control.
like so caught up in what you're doing, you're not even aware of the impact on you. Oh, wait, I'm suffering here.
Wait a minute, I'm suffering here.
No.
So realizing you're suffering, and then, kind of opening up to the fact that, wow, you know what? I'm probably not the only person suffering. This is part of life. Life is hard. I mean, come on. We all know that after the last
newsflash.
years. Life is
for everyone.
Newsflash. Yeah. If you didn't think it was before 2020, it certainly is now. Right? And so it helps to know that it's not a personal thing necessarily.
Right.
It feels personal because it's inside, and it feels like I'm the one that's being tortured or feeling terrible or whatever. And then being able to provide yourself with self-kindness. And that's the thing that takes the practice, because people, I don't know how to do that, I can't be kind to myself. And yes, it's hard. And that's where the practice really helps. And that's where the taking the mindful self-compassion courses or, practicing the formal practices really does help. And and I have to say that, that it doesn't necessarily come easy.
Right.
It didn't with me. It took a long time for me to be able to develop an internal voice that was kind, that was the kind of the opposite of the inner critic.
Right.
I find it really precious that you embody and sort of naturalize the mindful self-compassion practices. You have applied them to real life. And I felt like in the past few minutes, you've been, in effect, guiding us in conversation, because it's become so much part of your awareness. And you have a rich list of guided meditations on SoundCloud. I would highly recommend.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very, it's really, I guess, part of the journey that I've taken that, and it's really, it always is kind of somewhat surprising to me to say, like how I've described myself before as like this self-hate, and how I would be, kind of reacting to myself, to now really coming from a different perspective and really trying to like feel it as I, take this body and mind through the day. Yeah. And it's hard, and it doesn't come easy, and it hasn't come easy. And, I try to be realistic with people, because I think sometimes, people read about, oh, mindfulness. So if I do 10 minutes of mindfulness a day, then I'm going to, all these wonderful things are going to happen. And,
right.
Because there's been this kind of hype about it. And I unfortunately think there's been a little bit of hype about mindful self-compassion too, that, I take this 8-week course, I'm going to feel so much better about myself. And then the 8-week course is over, and maybe
you're still
you don't feel so much better about yourself. You're still you. You're still going to be you. And it, like I said, that's the beginning of the journey. That's not the end of the journey.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Those 8 weeks are just almost like loading a backpack full of tools and skills or something. But then it's like going to take a long time to figure out how to use them all. Like, where does this one go? And when is this one helpful? And, how do I bring these into my life in a way that's useful? And as you're saying, it's not easy or familiar. So it takes a lot of work and practice. I love how you've described really being able to kind of use them in life, not just, sitting down and pressing play, as lovely as that is in a guided practice, but also like when the stuff hits the fan, when everything feels out of control, how do I just, use that as a moment to check in, put my feet on the floor, give myself some kindness, all of that. Yeah. That's when the stuff's really useful. Yeah.
Exactly. And really, I feel strongly that's the only way that I think that ultimately you will embody it, that it will really make an impact, is if you learn to apply this stuff in as it happens, as life happens.
Yeah.
I mean, we call it practice for a reason. We're practicing. We're
Right.
sitting to practice so that we can apply it in real life.
That's right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
When the situation presents itself.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that happens is the situation presents itself and we forget to practice it.
That's right.
Apply it.
Yeah.
That happens to me all the time still.
Absolutely.
So, that's the thing that is my kind of cutting edge right now. My leading edge is to remember to do it, because it's so easy to get caught up in the situation and then realize afterwards, oh gosh, I had an opportunity to do that. And of course you can then do it afterward and process it. But boy, wouldn't it be nice if you caught it when it happened, so it doesn't take over the rest of your day or week or whatever.
I feel like that was essential for me. Running into a problem, taking it to a mindful self-compassion teacher and being pointed out, that's suffering. Because I would have never figured that out from reading a book or listening to guided meditations. And also there's a saying that the Dharma, the teachings get communicated by osmosis. And I think there's really something to that in terms of just absorbing it from a human being who embodies it. It's like, these aren't just ideas. Look how they respond to this and that. So when teaching self-compassion to people who are new to it, where do you find people get stuck most? Or what should they know? What is important for them to know and understand or experience? I
think if somebody's going to come to a mindful self-compassion class, it usually means they want to feel better about themselves. Well, not usually. They always want to feel better about themselves. Why else would you be taking a mindful self-compassion class, right? So there's already this kind of preloaded expectation that I want to feel better, which that's perfectly fine. I mean, of course we all want to feel better. Why would we do something if we didn't want to feel better? Right. The problem is that this isn't, we're talking about changing the nature of how we relate to ourselves through our body and our mind. And that's not an exact circuit that you can just flip. And so it's the practice, and I think meditation and mindfulness in general is and definitely mindful self-compassion is filled with paradoxes, meaning that you have to want to change enough to be able to learn it and do it, but you can't not want to change too much, otherwise it won't work. So not immediately, and not how you think. So one of the quotes that's often used is that we practice self-compassion not to feel better, but because we feel bad. And that's a hard concept for people to grok.
Right, like you're supposed to get the outcome, right? No, I'm supposed to feel better after this.
Right, I thought I was supposed to feel better. No, well, yeah, but no. And so it's hard sometimes to communicate. Well, it's impossible to communicate. So people just have to learn it. And in fact, there's an element of surrender that you must go through, in my opinion. in order to really fully embody the practice, or not even to fully embody it, but to really get much of anywhere with it. And the surrendering is you have to just let go of the outcome. And you just have to practice because you're suffering.
Right.
And the more you practice, just because you deserve it, just because you're worthy of it, just because you're just as worthy of self-compassion and self-kindness and tenderness, and just like anybody else is. Because of that,
Right.
the practice is going to sink in. If you can let go of, oh, I got to feel 10% better by next week or whatever.
Right.
Acceptance and commitment therapy calls it giving up the agenda of emotional control.
Right.
I don't want to feel this.
Yeah.
We need to give that up and open and accept.
Yeah.
For there to be more control, in a sense, more intelligent control.
Yes. And I found that that when I finally just gave up, I mean, this was a couple years into practicing, because I was really a striver. We talk about striving in mindfulness. You want to feel better, I'm practicing, I'm not feeling better. And then at one point, I just, I had the hardest time with one of the practices that we do, which is actually so powerful, is soothing and supportive touch. So being able to use your own hands and place them somewhere on your body, on your heart, on your face, on your stomach, giving yourself a hug. And this is part of the touchy-feely stuff that I really couldn't get into. And I avoided it. And I realized at some point that I was really missing out on something. And it took one teacher, a different teacher that I had not been exposed to. And it kind of goes to your point earlier, Alex, about, hearing something from a teacher or getting something from a teacher that's a little bit that you wouldn't have gotten through, just listening to something or reading it in a book. And I had an opportunity to study with this teacher, and the way she talked about it was it wasn't touchy-feely. It was just very nonchalant, and it was like, this feels weird, but can you just let it feel weird? It was something about the way she said it, and I said, yeah, I can feel weird. That's all right. What the hell, And once I did that, I was able to really take in the power of this practice, and it was a breakthrough. It was like something opened up when I just let go. And I said, whatever, I'm so tired. You get tired, whatever it is.
Right.
Get exasperated. That's when you surrender, right? You either get up or you go the other way. And I'm tired of going the other way. I'm just giving up.
Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest thing when I have new students is that, they're become, yes, you got to learn the basics and all of that, but just don't rush the process and just realize that it's the fact that you show up, the fact that you do it, that's a self-compassionate act in and of itself.
It's fascinating. What you're describing seems to fit what acceptance and commitment therapy calls creative hopelessness. So that's when you sort of give up the attempt to control experience in the way that you think you should, which hasn't been working, and then that opens up the possibilities.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. I've never done ACT, but I must be channeling it or something. I don't know.
Many synergistic ideas for sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The biggest challenge that I have now is that I have such limited time available to be able to share the practices, and to do it. I mean, like I said, I can't do this full time. Can't even do it part time, really. I do as much as I can do within the confines of my limited functional capacity today. And I have a feeling that I'll continue to do that in whatever form, as long as I can. Because you probably can tell the passion that I feel about this, because
Yes.
I was such a different person before. And it's not to say that I'm like a completely self-compassionate person. Of course not. I have a very realistic view of it, but I can definitely relate to myself differently today than I did before. And if I can do it, then boy, I think anybody can.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much for sharing of yourself and of your wisdom.
Thank you.
How can people learn more about you?
I have a website. I have a website. It's davidteitelman.com. And Teitelman is spelled Teitelman.com. I don't offer very many classes because of my functional limitations. I do. I will facilitate the public. I do facilitate the public circles of practice on Friday mornings, usually for one of the sessions. So if people want to, that's open to the public. You can go to the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion website and find that, and you can usually find me there. And and then follow me on my website occasionally. If I'm up to it, I might teach a class or two.
Lovely. Thanks so much, David. So good to get to know you and hear you share about your life and your experiences. Much appreciated.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for doing this good work.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.